The loudest sound your engine can make is silence. Right after a $20 gasket floods a cylinder and locks the crank. This isn't rare. Hydrolock happens fast when incompressible coolant slips past a failed head gasket or intake seal. In the next minutes, I'll show you how a red temperature gauge, sweet exhaust smell, and disappearing coolant are your only early warnings. We'll compare a preventive gasket job, hundreds to maybe $1,500, against the cost of a new long block. If you've ever shrugged off white smoke on startup, you need to hear this before you turn the key again. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Why does a drip the size of a coin end with a dead engine and a tow truck? Because the moment liquid sneaks into a cylinder, everything you expect an engine to do stops working the way it should. Hydrolock is simple. Liquid enters a cylinder. The piston rises. Liquid doesn't compress, so the weakest link gives. In a healthy cycle, air compresses into a tight charge, and the piston reaches top dead center without drama. Swap that compressible cushion for coolant, and the piston hits an unmovable wall. At that instant, the connecting rod tries to push through a solid column, flexes past its limit, and the crankshaft stops like it hit a steel bar. Think about a slow leak. A hairline breach in the head gasket seeps a teaspoon of coolant while the car cools overnight. Gravity pulls that fluid into one cylinder, right on top of the piston. By morning, you crank the engine. The starter spins, the piston climbs, and suddenly the motor stalls, coughs, or slams to a stop. If it barely clears, you get a violent stumble, a brief misfire, then it smooths out as the engine expels the liquid. That "it runs fine now" is the most dangerous part, because the rod may have already bent a few thousandths. It still runs, but every stroke after that is on borrowed time. Now take the high RPM version. You hit standing water, or an intake manifold gasket splits under vacuum, and a gulp of liquid floods a cylinder while the engine is spinning fast. The higher the RPM, the greater the momentum on the rotating assembly and the sharper the impact. Instead of a stall, you get sudden mechanical shock. The piston acts like a ram. The coolant acts like an anvil. Something yields. Often it's the slender middle of the connecting rod, which bows instantly, or a rod bearing that takes a crushing load and wipes out its film of oil. Here's why even a few milliliters at the top of the stroke can end it. Near top dead center, clearance volume in many engines is only a few cubic centimeters. Air would squeeze into that tiny space. Coolant won't. The pressure spike rises faster than the metal can flex elastically. That static column creates bending stress beyond what the rod was designed to handle under combustion loads. Engineers design rods for peak cylinder pressures during ignition, not for a solid block of fluid-resisting motion. With fluid that cannot compress, the pressure rises almost instantaneously, leaving no escape path and no time for the crank to rotate through. Think of it as a hydraulic press you didn't order. The piston becomes the ram, driven by the starter or by the inertia of a spinning crank. The fluid is the die, immovable and absolute. The rod and bearings are the sacrificial parts. You can spot the warning signs before the press slams shut. One spark plug looks brand new because steam scoured it clean. The engine fights you on a cold start, then clears up. You get a brief misfire code that disappears after a minute. It smells sweet for a few seconds from the tailpipe, and the coolant reservoir drops slowly without leaving a spot on the ground. When the end arrives, you'll hear a metallic clank or a hard knock that happens right as the engine stalls. That's the rod bending into a banana shape or a bearing collapsing as the crank halts against an incompressible slug. The sound is short, ugly, and final. And it all began with a seal that cost less than a tank of gas, turning a harmless seep into a force that overpowers steel. If that's the punch, the real question is how a $20 seal starts the chain reaction in the first place. What single smell, one light, and one gauge can save you thousands if you act today? The answer is the sweet scent from the exhaust, the red temperature warning, and the coolant level gauge or reservoir line that keeps drifting down. Those three signals, together or alone, point straight at a failure starting where parts cost less than a takeout order, but sit between your cylinders and a repair bill with 4 zeros. Let's call them what they are. The head gasket sits between the block and the head, sealing combustion, coolant, and oil passages. Intake manifold gaskets on many engines carry coolant as well, and a split there feeds liquid straight into an intake runner. Some cars even route coolant through the throttle body to prevent icing, using small hoses and barbs that harden, crack, or loosen with age. Heat cycles cook rubber and composite materials. They shrink, swell, and lose clamping force. Detonation hammers the fire ring around the cylinders and lifts the head just enough to create a leak path. Once that seal weakens, coolant doesn't stay where it belongs. Most people miss the early clues. The coolant tank slowly drops without a green puddle on your driveway. The exhaust smells a little sweet for 30 seconds after a cold start. A thin white haze drifts from the tailpipe, then fades as the engine warms. Your scanner shows a random misfire, P0301, P0302, pick a cylinder, and it clears after a minute. You twist off the oil cap and it looks like a latte. Each item by itself seems minor. Together, they're a roadmap to coolant intrusion. Here's a real-world pattern. A daily driver starts sipping coolant. No drips under the car. The owner tops the reservoir every Sunday with water. 2 weeks in, Monday morning brings a rough start and a flashing MIL. The engine catches, stumbles, then smooths out by the time the idle settles. On Friday, the crank stops halfway through a start. Starter clicks, then nothing. The rod bent on that cold misfire morning, and the final sip locked the cylinder. The tow bill is the first of many. Overheating is the big accelerator. A spike on the temperature gauge or a red light means the system lost pressure or flow. Hot aluminum heads expand, lose their flatness, and when they cool, they don't return perfectly. That warp breaks the uniform clamp of the head gasket, and combustion gases start bubbling into the cooling system while coolant noses into a cylinder on shutdown. That light isn't the last warning. It's the first domino. Ignore it, and the failure moves from reversible to terminal. The cost curve is brutal. Catch it early, and a gasket job runs in the $500 to $1,500 range depending on layout, with V engines landing higher due to doubled parts and labor. Wait, and you're shopping for a long block at $3,000 to $5,000 or more, plus towing, new fluids, machine work, and days without a car. The cheapest time to fix this is always yesterday. You don't need a full shop to confirm suspicion. Pump the cooling system up with a hand tester and let it sit overnight. A drop in pressure with no external drip points inward. Use a block tester to sniff for combustion gases in the coolant. After the car sits, pull the spark plugs and look for one that's damp or unusually clean. That's your wet cylinder. Adjust how you drive when the signs appear. Don't spin the engine hard if it's misfiring. After a deep puddle, be gentle for a few minutes. If you suspect coolant in a cylinder, disable ignition and fuel, then crank to push fluid out before it bends steel. Acting at the first sweet smell or unexplained coolant loss can turn a $20 seal and a weekend of work into a save. You now know the signals and the stakes. Here's how to respond the moment they appear. Hydrolock strikes in a heartbeat, but the trail starts days earlier. A faintly sweet tailpipe, a brief white puff on cold start, and a coolant reservoir that creeps downward with no puddle. Those are the tells that buy you time. If you notice any of them, stop driving. Test for coolant intrusion, schedule the repair, and don't restart until you know it's dry. A basic coolant pressure test kit can help you confirm a leak, but follow your vehicle's repair manual for procedures and specs. Next time, we'll walk through the exact 5-minute checks that confirm a breach before a silent stall becomes a locked crank.